Did you know that Artur Beterbiev is the only world champion with a 100% knockout rate? From Canelo Álvarez's incredible versatility to Beterbiev's raw knockout power, here are 25 boxing legends who are still alive and with us. 1. Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson is the most intimidating fighter ever to enter a boxing ring. He was not only a champion, he was a phenomenon. Tyson was born in Brooklyn, New York, and grew up with a difficult childhood, but boxing saved him. Trained by the legendary Cus D'Amato, Tyson turned into a machine. Tyson was the youngest heavyweight champion in history at 20 years old, and when he fought, he was expected to knock people out. He possessed explosive power, lightning speed punches, and a way of overpowering opponents within minutes. His dominance earned him the undisputed heavyweight champion, as he was the WBA, WBC, and IBF champions. Not without some personal and professional setbacks, Tyson is still one of boxing's largest personalities. He remains active in boxing, training, commentating, and even participating in a return to exhibition matches. Tyson today is more than a fighter. He's an entrepreneur, talk show host, and still arguably the most visible person in athletics. 2. Evander Holyfield. Holyfield was never the largest or the strongest, but he was among the toughest fighters in history. He began as a light heavyweight before advancing to heavyweight, where he tested himself against the best. Holyfield became the cruiserweight champion by consensus before moving up to the heavyweight division, where he became a legend. He won the heavyweight title 4 times. No one had achieved this before him, but most famous of all were his bouts with Mike Tyson. In 1996, Holyfield surprised the world when he beat Tyson, showing the world that skill and resolve can defeat power. Their second bout in 1997 was made notorious when Tyson bit part of Holyfield's ear off, but Holyfield remained cool-headed and was still a consummate professional. 3. Lennox Lewis. Lennox Lewis may not be as flashy as Tyson or as theatrical as Holyfield, but he was one of the greatest and most technically gifted heavyweights in history. Born in London, England, Lewis had a distinguished amateur career that lasted for years, including winning an Olympic gold medal in 1988 before he went pro. Lewis became a heavyweight champion during the 1990s and ultimately unified the division, becoming the final undisputed heavyweight champion before the belts were split among various organizations. Lewis was unique in that he could adjust. He possessed size, reach, and smarts in the ring, which made him a nightmare for fighters. His greatest battles were wins over Evander Holyfield, Mike Tyson, and Vitaly Klitschko. When he retired in 2003, he had nothing more to prove. He retired a champion, one of the few heavyweight champions to do so without coming out of retirement. Today, Lewis is still active in the sport as an analyst and commentator, passing on his expertise to the new generation of boxers. 4. Roberto Duran. Roberto Duran is not only a boxing icon, save for a warrior. Born in Panama, Duran was famous for his brutal style, phenomenal punching power, and unforgiving drive. He entered the professional ranks at age 16 and soon became the most feared fighter in the lightweight division. Nicknamed Manos de Piedra, Hands of Stone, Duran possessed knockout power that sent even the strongest opponents flying to the canvas. But he was more than a one-punch wonder. He possessed extraordinary defense, endurance, and the talent to pressure opponents into making errors. Duran won world championships in 4 different weight divisions, demonstrating that he wasn't only the best in one division, he was capable of fighting and winning against bigger, stronger men. His most legendary win was in the year 1980, when he fought Sugar Ray Leonard in a savage bout that exhibited his unbelievable toughness. But in their rematch, Duran stunned the world by quitting halfway through the bout, saying the now famous words, "No mas, no more." Despite that incident, his reputation remained intact. He kept on fighting for decades, retiring only at the age of 50. 5. Sugar Ray Leonard. Sugar Ray Leonard was not only a good boxer, he was a star. With his blinding quickness, quick reflexes, and likable personality, he was one of the biggest stars in boxing in the 1980s. His fights were not just about winning them, they were about entertaining. Leonard captured world championships in 5 weight classes, a phenomenal feat that demonstrated his adaptability. He was able to outbox fighters with his nimble footwork and blindingly fast combinations, but he also possessed the power and toughness to trade punches with some of the greatest punchers in the game. Leonard's most well-known rivalry was with Roberto Duran. Their initial bout in 1980 resulted in Leonard losing a close fight, but he returned more powerful in the rematch, employing his speed and agility to annoy Duran and make him retire. He also had classic fights with Thomas Hearns, Marvin Hagler, and Wilfred Benitez, fights that demonstrated his talent, intelligence, and capacity to improvise in the ring. After retiring, Leonard was still one of the most revered voices in boxing. He went on to become a popular broadcaster, breaking down fights and providing analysis only a champion could. He also inspired thousands of young boxers with what he did outside of the ring, helping promote the sport and share his wisdom. 6. Thomas Hearns. If there was any fighter who embraced his nickname, it was Thomas the Hitman Hearns. One of the sport's greatest pound-for-pound fighters, he had a right hand capable of finishing fights in one shot. Contrary to the style of most knockout artists, Hearns wasn't merely a brawler. He was an able technician capable of setting up punches and taking apart foes. Hearns was the first pugilist in history to capture world titles in 5 different weight divisions, a remarkable feat because he began life as a skinny welterweight before gradually ascending to compete in the heavier divisions. His reach, speed, and phenomenal punching power made him a nightmare to fight against. One of the most well-known battles of Hearns was the one against Sugar Ray Leonard in 1981. It was a classic, with Hearns overpowering at the start, only for Leonard to mount a classic comeback to bring Hearns' victory to a halt in the closing rounds. Hearns had an equally forgettable war against Marvin Hagler in 1985, a contest so savage it remains one of the greatest 3-round fights of all time in boxing. Despite suffering through harsh losses, Hearns never flinched in the face of a challenge. He fought year after year, showing the world that he was among the most difficult of fighters to exist in his generation. 7. Julio César Chávez. When individuals mention Mexican boxing greats, Julio César Chávez tops the list. Born in Mexico, Chávez emerged as one of the most dominant boxers of his era, with several world titles in various weight classes. He was not only a champion, but a sign of heart, grit, and stubborn perseverance. Chávez possessed an incredible professional record, having won more than 100 bouts during his career. He was once undefeated for a staggering 90 fights, a record that might never be equaled. His relentless fighting style, crushing body punches, and iron chin made him almost unbeatable. One of his most renowned battles was against Meldrick Taylor in 1990. Taylor was ahead on points, but Chávez never quit. At the end of the fight, he delivered a vicious combination that sent Taylor to the canvas. The fight was stopped by the referee, and Chávez was awarded one of the most dramatic wins in boxing history. Even after retirement, Chávez remains boxing's favorite son. 8. Oscar de la Hoya. Oscar de la Hoya was more than a boxer. He was a superstar. Known as the Golden Boy, he possessed the ideal combination of ability, charm, and marketability that made him one of the sport's biggest draws. But De La Hoya was more than a pretty face. He was a world-class fighter with amazing ability. He captured an Olympic gold medal in 1992, and that made him an overnight sensation. As a professional, he proceeded to capture 10 world titles across 6 weight classes, demonstrating that he was not merely a brilliant fighter in one division. He could fight up in weight and dominate all the same. His speed, quick boxing ability, and crushing left hook made him a nightmare to fight. De La Hoya engaged in legendary bouts with some of the greatest boxers of his time, including Julio Cesar Chavez, Shane Mosley, Felix Trinidad, and Floyd Mayweather Jr. His bouts were always a must-see affair, and he brought boxing into the mainstream. Once he retired, De La Hoya was one of the most successful boxing promoters in history. He created Golden Boy Promotions, which has built careers for numerous elite fighters. Though he is no longer fighting, his influence still lingers on the sport. 9. Floyd Mayweather Jr. Floyd Mayweather Jr. is arguably the greatest boxer of all time, and the statistics bear it out. He retired with a spotless 50, 0 record, something that few, if any, fighters have ever accomplished. A master of defense, Mayweather's lightning-quick counterpunches and unmatchable ring IQ made him the best at not getting hit while hitting. Mayweather came from a boxing family, and it was clear from an early age that he was special. He won an Olympic bronze medal in 1996 before turning pro, and from that point on, he dominated the sport for 2 decades. His nickname, Money, wasn't for publicity alone. Mayweather became the world's highest-paid athlete, earning millions of dollars for his bouts. But aside from the money, he was a master boxing technician. His capacity to read his opponents, adapt his game plan, and not take damage made him almost unbeatable. Mayweather captured world championships in 5 weight classes and beat some of the sport's biggest stars, such as Oscar de la Hoya, Manny Pacquiao, and Canelo Álvarez. 10. Manny Pacquiao. Manny Pacquiao is not only a boxing great, he's an international icon. Born in the Philippines, Pacquiao's path to greatness is one of the greatest underdog stories in sports history. From abject poverty, he rose to become the only boxer to win world titles in 8 weight divisions. That's a feat no one else has ever attained. What set Pacquiao apart wasn't so much his achievements, but how he fought. He was famous for his explosive speed, relentless pressure, and crushing power. His fights were never dull. Each time he entered the ring, he was exciting. Fans adored his fearless style, and he became one of the largest pay-per-view stars in the history of boxing. Some of his most significant victories were against premier fighters such as Oscar de la Hoya, Miguel Cotto, and Juan Manuel Marquez. His protracted feud with Floyd Mayweather Jr. was the most anticipated bout in history, selling a record number of pay-per-view tickets. Outside the ring, Pacquiao became a history maker in another sense. He became a politician in the Philippines, even making a bid for the presidency in 2022. 11. Bernard Hopkins. If there is one adjective to sum up Bernard Hopkins, it is longevity. Hopkins didn't merely have an excellent boxing career, he had one of the longest and most productive ones in history. He began his professional career in 1988 and continued fighting at the top level for almost 3 decades. But what truly distinguished him was his capacity to capture world titles even in his late 40s. Nicknamed the Executioner, Hopkins was intelligent in the ring. He wasn't flashy, but he was one of the smartest. His defense, counterpunching ability, and control of fights made him a nightmare to fight. Hopkins became the undisputed middleweight champion with several world titles simultaneously. But his most historic achievement was when he became the oldest boxer to win a world championship at 49 years old. Most fighters retire much earlier than that, but Hopkins continued to prove people wrong. Some of his largest victories were over opponents such as Oscar de la Hoya, Felix Trinidad, and Antonio Tarver. Even in his older age, he was still fighting the best competition and winning. His work ethic was unparalleled, and he always entered fights in top physical condition. After retiring, Hopkins became a mentor and promoter for young fighters. He still has a large presence in boxing today, sharing his experience with the new generation. 12. Roy Jones Jr. Roy Jones Jr. wasn't merely a champion, he was a showman. With his scorching hand speed, phenomenal reflexes, and innovative fighting style, Jones ruled various weight classes. At his prime, he was so dominant that he made elite boxers seem like amateurs. Jones began his career as a super middleweight and was soon one of the most thrilling combatants in the sport. He captured world titles in several weight classes, but one of the greatest things he accomplished was going up to heavyweight and capturing a world title, something that few fighters in the sport have ever done. Jones possessed an unusual, unorthodox fighting style. He would drop his hands, taunt his opponents, and remain faster than they were able to touch him. He punched from zany angles and possessed knockout punch power in each hand. He was like observing a video game character. He could do the impossible that others could not. One of his most notable victories was over James Toney, who was thought to be unbeatable. Jones made it look simple, dominating the bout from the opening bell to the final bell. He also had gigantic victories over Bernard Hopkins, Antonio Tarver, and John Ruiz. Even in his post-prime years, Jones kept fighting for many years, facing opponents deep into his 40s. 13. George Foreman. George Foreman is a legend in the world of boxing. He was twice a heavyweight champion, but his story becomes unbelievable due to his record-breaking comeback. Foreman was world champion for the first time in 1973 when he annihilated Joe Frazier within 2 rounds. His power was a Hollywood fantasy. Opponents didn't only lose to him, they got knocked out mercilessly. His punches were like sledgehammers, and he became one of the scariest boxers of his generation. But then he suffered his astonishing defeat to Muhammad Ali in the iconic Rumble in the Jungle of 1974. Ali outwitted him, employing his rope-a-dope tactic to exhaust Foreman before knocking him down in the 8th round. That bout changed Foreman's career, and after a few more years, he retired from boxing. Most boxers retire and never return. But Foreman was not like most boxers. In 1994, at the age of 45, he stunned the world by knocking out Michael Moorer to regain the heavyweight title again, 20 years after losing it. No one had ever done anything like that before. He became the oldest heavyweight champion in history, showing that age does not determine a boxer's greatness. 14. Vladimir Klitschko. When individuals mention top champions, Vladimir Klitschko is a figure who always springs to mind. He dominated the heavyweight division for more than a decade, and as such, he ranks among the longest reigning boxers ever. Ukrainian-born Vladimir had a frustrating style for opponents. He was a tall, physically strong man with one of the greatest jabs in boxing history. His method was uncomplicated but successful. Keep the opponent at arm's length, wear them down, and then dispose of them with his devastating right hand. His reign began early in the 2000s, and from 2006 until 2015, he defended various world titles against everyone who challenged him. Others called his approach monotonous, but no one questioned the results. He had 64 wins, 53 by way of knockout. He boxed and beat many of the best heavyweights around, David Haye, Alexander Povetkin, and Samuel Peter being a few. One of his most famous battles came in 2017 against Anthony Joshua. Although he lost, the bout was epic. Vladimir, who was 41 at the time, knocked down Joshua and nearly won before being stopped in the 11th round. Even in defeat, he illustrated why he was a true warrior. 15. Vitaly Klitschko. If Vladimir was the technically gifted boxer, Vitaly Klitschko was the warrior. He was not only a champion, he was one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. His chin was made of iron, and he possessed a relentless style of fighting that made him a terror for anyone who stepped into the ring with him. Vitaly won world championships several times, ruling over the heavyweight class with his unmatched power. Perhaps his most legendary bout was in 2003 against Lennox Lewis. Vitaly was controlling the fight until a nasty cut made the doctor intervene and call off the bout. Although he lost, he gained huge respect in that bout because he fought through everything. He continued to retain the WBC heavyweight championship for decades, establishing that he was among the best of his time. How he was different from others was that he could absorb punches and just keep moving forward. He lost only twice in his career, and those 2 instances were due to injuries. Nobody ever knocked him out. 16. Arturo Gatti. If there was ever a fighter who epitomized heart and grit, it was Arturo Gatti. He was not only a boxer, he was a gladiator. His bouts were never dull, and he was renowned for his capacity to absorb punishment and still come forward. Gatti possessed power, but what set him apart was his knack for turning battles around. Regardless of how badly he was hurt, he would always manage to continue fighting. His classic trilogy with Mickey Ward is still being discussed today. Those 3 bouts were filled with vicious exchanges, knockdowns, and miraculous comebacks. They weren't fights, they were wars. Although Gatti won world championships, he was revered more for his style of fighting than for his titles. People understood that each time they saw him in the ring, they were in for something special. He provided boxing with some of its best moments and is considered one of the hardest fighters ever. 17. Shane Mosley. Shane Mosley was a lightning rod in boxing gloves. He possessed a rare blend of speed and power that made him one of the most feared fighters of his generation. He didn't merely win fights, he swept aside some of the greatest boxers of his generation. Mosley became known when he moved up to lightweight and cut through the division. He was unbeaten, knocking out all but a handful of his opponents with ease. But he didn't rest there. He moved up in weight and became a champion in several divisions. One of his greatest wins was in 2000 when he beat Oscar de la Hoya to win the welterweight title. That victory solidified his status as one of the greats. Later in his life, he even stunned the world by almost knocking out Floyd Mayweather Jr. in the 2nd round of their bout. Mosley was famous for always fighting the best. He didn't avoid challenges, he welcomed them. 18. Joe Calzaghe. Some boxers are famous for their battles in the ring, but others are famous for their domination. Joe Calzaghe is one of the latter. He didn't merely win bouts, he never lost a single bout. The Welsh boxing great dominated the super middleweight division for more than a decade. He was quick, clever, and possessed a phenomenal work rate. Unlike most power punchers, Calzaghe used speed and volume. His punches landed in fast combinations, overpowering his foes. One of his greatest victories was over Jeff Lacey in 2006. Lacey was touted as the next big star, but Calzaghe walked all over him, taking every round. That win made the world see just how good he truly was. He subsequently gained weight and beat Bernard Hopkins and Roy Jones Jr., 2 of the best boxers in history. At the time of his retirement, he had a record of 46-0, which is a unique feat in boxing. 19. Miguel Cotto. Puerto Rico has produced some of boxing's greatest stars, and Miguel Cotto is among the greatest to have ever emerged from the island. He was hard, talented, and possessed one of the most devastating left hooks in boxing history. Cotto was a 4-division champion, quite an accomplishment for any fighter. He began at junior welterweight and eventually moved up through the ranks and fought and defeated some of the greatest boxers of his day. One of his most iconic battles was against Antonio Margarito in 2008. It was a war, and Cotto lost heartbreakingly. But in 2011, he avenged himself, dominating Margarito in the rematch and demonstrating his greatness. Cotto also battled icons such as Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Manny Pacquiao, always leaving everything on the table, regardless of his opponent. 20. Juan Manuel Marquez. Mexican boxing has given the world some of the greatest, toughest fighters ever, and Juan Manuel Marquez is among them. He was not only a fighter, but a boxing mastermind. His capacity to read his opponents, time punches to perfection, and counterattack with lethal precision made him one of the greatest technical boxers of his time. Marquez became a world champion in several weights, but he became a legend because he feuded with Manny Pacquiao. The two gladiators clashed 4 times, and each bout was historic. Marquez had nearly defeated Pacquiao on multiple occasions, but their 4th bout in 2012 sealed his fate. With one of the greatest knockouts in boxing history, Marquez delivered a perfectly placed right hand that knocked Pacquiao out cold. That single punch made him a legend. 21. Gennady Golovkin. If you are a fan of power punchers, then you must be a fan of Gennady G.G. Golovkin. The Kazakhstani middleweight champion established himself as one of the most feared boxers of his generation. His approach was straightforward: walk forward, wear down his opponents, and knock them out. Golovkin was so overpowering that for years, fighters wouldn't even give him a shot. He wore multiple world titles and enjoyed an amazing knockout streak, destroying opponent after opponent. His most well-known bout was with Canelo Álvarez, where the two fought for a middleweight dominance. Though the fights were disputed, with many feeling Golovkin should have won, they only served to show how deadly he was in the ring. But GGG wasn't merely about pure power. He possessed a keen boxing mind. His ring cutoffs, timing, and footwork made him more than a simple slugger. He was an all-around fighter who could break down even top-level opponents. 22. Andre Ward. Some fighters succeed using knockout power. Other fighters succeed using skill. Andre Ward was one of the brightest and best disciplined boxers ever. He retired undefeated, something that only a handful of fighters have ever accomplished. Ward's greatest asset was not his body, but his brain. He could adapt to anyone and became nigh unbeatable. He claimed a gold medal in the 2004 Olympics, establishing at an early age that he would become great. One of his biggest accomplishments was defeating some of the world's finest super middleweights in the Super 6 tournament. He then migrated to light heavyweight and took away another world championship, defeating feared Sergey Kovalev. 23. Tyson Fury. Heavyweight boxing has never been about big egos and bigger fists. Tyson Fury is a fantastic fighter and also one of the greatest talkers in the history of the sport. Whether he's trash-talking at press conferences, belting out tunes after fights, or executing unbelievable comebacks, Fury always delivers entertainment. But aside from the personality, Fury is a great boxer. At 6'9", he glides around like a fighter half his size. His foot movement, defense, and ability to dodge punches set him apart in the heavyweight division. Fury's greatest moment was in 2015, when he stunned the world by beating Vladimir Klitschko to become the heavyweight champion. Just when everyone thought his career was finished because of personal issues, he came back even bigger. In 2018, he battled Deontay Wilder, enduring a crushing knockdown in the 12th round that seemed to finish the fight. But somehow, Fury managed to get up, and the fight ended in a thrilling draw. He went on to dominate Wilder in their rematch, affirming that he was the greatest heavyweight of his generation. Fury's combination of size, ability, and assurance makes him one of the most unpredictable and entertaining boxers in the sport today. 24. Canelo Álvarez. Canelo Álvarez is one of the greatest and most talented boxers of this era. Hailing from Guadalajara, Mexico, he began boxing at the age of 15 and rose to prominence in no time. What sets him apart is his versatility. He can fight aggressively, counterpunch, and face opponents of various weight classes. Throughout his career, Canelo has captured world championships in 4 different weight classes, demonstrating his supremacy. He's defeated some of the toughest fighters around, such as Gennady Golovkin, Miguel Cotto, and Sergey Kovalev. With his skills of adapting to any type of fighter, he is considered to be one of the most lethal fighters in the ring. Regardless of his popularity, Canelo remains committed to the sport, continually getting better and stepping up to face the biggest tests. 25. Artur Beterbiev. Artur Beterbiev is raw power incarnate. The Russian-Canadian fighter is the lone 100% knockout percentage champion in the history of boxing. All his opponents have been knocked out in the ring. Beterbiev is a current light heavyweight champion, and his bouts are raw annihilation. His physicality plus decent boxing technique makes him all but immovable.